Last number some digital some going to grow.
Okay, so hello everyone. So now we'll start.
Tani karita che. Atso di Georgette tanda ngaso danzen da ranchin ma chonri tanya tablam ti korle jiatre ate korle nambijongo na la kandi sheore ti korle chigjaya.
Yes, so today's topic is about self-cherishing attitude and self-grasping attitude. So in today's class, we're going to engage in what are the methods in order to decrease them, this kind of self-cherishing attitude and self-grasping attitude. So we'll talk from the perspective of the Buddhist scriptures mainly and the Buddhist philosophy.
Rejeta ngaso nachu na ni ngaso kanga yong tong da wat ka rezina ngaso lita sem ko kanga tsamat leg goni yong yore ze leziat ka ri yong zena nyomon ba do chata je dans ta contrôle son chata te so la te ni yong yore te so ya te son na ka reziti ran chinzen ta dans li yong yore ze ni te je yore.
Yeah, so if you are talking from the Buddhist perspective, so all the problems in our life, whether they are like problems that are associated with the physical aspect or like mental problems, whatever, so they come out of karma, out of cause and effect. So in the karma, so it comes based on our disturbing emotions such as jealousy, hatred, attachment, and so forth. These emotions as well in turn, they come based on the self-cherishing attitude and the self-grasping mind.
Last what tani tanda danzen de pena okay kange te me pas zo ayo
Sancho again.
ah
Sancho shi.
muko chamba te gris genga gonda sorry chamba no japsa
He's a bit cold now.
tanda oh yeah yung ko mandush kensa tuche thank you
Sancho mi go.
tanda dingar te me pas zo ala pena shindong ching me pas zo ala tawa ni kogo ana ji dingar me pas zo ala ya tawa ni kogo ga tawshi te tes na chuna ni sungu yore.
Yes, so just as if you want to cut tree from its roots, so we need to cut it from its roots, right? Like if you want to cut tree like totally, so it's the same manner if you want to eliminate the suffering in our life, so we need to cut its root.
Na son tati me pas zo sal tawshi yore yo mare ze ondi ta tanda nyomong tsawa ta pate son na dangzen da ran shin zi yimba ta sabore ta dangzen da ran shin zan de me pas zo ya tablam yore we zena ta tele tablam chin dus duat ka rezi da me pa da to tsani me pa ha kona dangze jawa tablam chin du la wore.
Yes, so now we need to ask the following question, whether there is kind of method to eliminate the suffering or not. So we said that the suffering comes based on the disturbing emotion, and the disturbing emotion comes based on the self-cherishing attitude and the self-grasping mind. So now the question is whether there is kind of a method in order to eliminate the self-cherishing attitude and the self-grasping mind. So if you talk from the Buddhist perspective, there is a way to eliminate this. And the way to eliminate it is by what we call kind of analyzing or examining the self by means of searching for it.
Sans attirer su jo cha su nra ja su nra to da ze ta to ze tantere da ta to ze tandela ngombo le jo ko songo na ni sholo ka ni ge ja chi ni dirija ya.
Yes, so yeah, this is going to be the main topic of the class, this searching or looking for the self by examining it. So we are going to discuss about it based on two verses of Arya Nagarjuna, a Pandita master from India. Based on two verses of it. Yeah. That's it.
Ndik sa so ai ale nge che tan da otani
Will it be okay if he'll take picture?
otani tanda Dao tao to zang tang tel tanda sholo ka ni yo pinan tanda dao tao to tse goya de kar re zi yon de nga tso kangen tsama ta rang chin zi so 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 nga ge che te jok nga mo ni gonda ge che te so so ge de ki tang kangen se ta ko che te gik te la te ni ta ndo pa ta man jom ni kangen ti yon de ya ta nga tso te she yo son ta ta nga ze ya ta kan ri chi du de ki ke che te gik de sa nga ze ya ta kan du te ko ke ja tre.
Yes, so we are going to talk about, as we said, the searching or like analyzing the self by means of searching it. And so what is the necessity or like what is the need of doing such a method? Basically, so in our life, we are working from day until night in order to kind of satisfy the self that we possess, like kind of gain happiness and to get rid of our suffering. We strive all day in order to kind of fulfill this kind of wish of the self. But we don't know what are the methods in order like to gain happiness, so we don't know also the manner of existing that kind of self, and therefore we have a lot of problems. So this is the need or necessity.
That's what any Jagar the Zanimang Matilla Chingrota, Dagziat come to Goni, Zetanchi Yore, come to Ziat, Sankam Chankam Menkov Longcam, Namshitan, and Namki comes in come to Zayore National.
Yes, okay. So one way in order to search for the self is to is what we call through the 6 elements. So we already explained it in the previous lesson. So the 6 elements are the fire, earth, earth, water, fire, wind, space, and main consciousness.
Also, Mizia, the Tenji Sopa, Titril Teni Trub de Gore, Titril Teni Trub de Go Sansata, Nazi de at the Teni Nichashi, Pena Sazina, Sangonita, Zupolio Marta, Shat on Chala Sopal, Mar, Shat a Ribala Sopal, Sag Certain, only Tanda Zupo Trot the Sol Meze Viore, Teni Carlon, Naso Jong Viora, the Sol Lonze Ore, Tanda Chatan Chase La Sopal Cherry, Tani Copata Canata Stoncha Yoritel, Namka Tantani, Namshitera, Naso Pochashi, the Tenji could trap the Gorezeni, that patches arbore. Sure.
Yes, so how these 6 elements are related to us? Basically, the self is being dependent on the 6 elements. So in which way is being dependent on them? If we take the earth element, so it includes the what we call the flesh, the meat in our body, and so forth. So this is what the earth element includes. If we take the water element, it includes all the different liquids we have in our body, the blood, and so forth. If we take the fire element, we talk about the warmth in our body, the temperature, and so forth. If we are talking about the air, the wind element in our body, so we are talking about the breathe mainly, about the air that we breathe, and or like the lungikan, yes, about the breathe. If we talk about the space element, so we talk about the empty spaces that we have in our body, for example, in the abdominal, in the mouth, and so forth. And if we talk about the consciousness, so this is a bit more easy to grasp for us, like in general, like the consciousness that we have. So by these, like by searching among these 6 elements that the self is being dependent upon them, so this is one way in order to examine or to analyze the self.
That's what any also Nabia Naziachi Yoata Sama Hako de Gorita, not the part of Chationa come to Trinity. Telatenita, Riri, so Shata Chalas or Badasongata Rendo Munduma Zini, Tinisonda, that's what Remena, Tangazini Savachimo joking amoni, Chardon Monsum J. Desangata Kawandu, Tinjimas Zinita, Chepaina. Tani pa tesona nga tato tsani mani pazia nga zia tenzu tu sa me anje chi ore tele yona so so ranchin zeng danzan de ma go mario marinjo ore ze ore ma cha so.
Okay, so basically what we do like in this kind of method is that the self that is being dependent on these 6 kind of elements, so we are going to search in each kind of element and see like whether there is something that we can point on and say that this is the self or this is I, because in general like, we can say like this is I, this is you, and so forth. But the method here is looking about the 6 elements that the self is being dependent on, and to see like whether there is something that we can actually point on and say like this is the self, this is I. And if we really look and try to find, there's nothing in these 6 elements that eventually we'll be able to say and to point on and say this is the I or this is the self. And therefore, yes, it's very, very meaningful because basically we are working for the self and we cherish the self so much from day to night. And if we will really try to find and we'll really try to search, and then we won't be able to find this kind of self that we work for him like so hard and we cherish so much. So eventually it will really help to decrease this kind of self-cherishing attitude and the self-grasping mind. This is the benefit of this kind of method.
That's all. Tanda, tengo mole jubko, tanda umari chinchiwa na ni sonwa kam chuk go ni dame pa zi tandere. Tanji zi de na kar pengrezi te soso ze at kawandu kandu ze pa zi de ti parishi soso ze at zina nga ze ni tsawa chimbo de zina manye pa chi ha ko sona. Tani mi chi ke soso le chi tsing na bo chi la na lang sang control za ma yong wa ta chi de zi na san ro kang ni chen na de zi ke sem le kang ni men che wa tanji shu pengre kar ze ti nga ze at zi sona no chi ja sa ta tanji Takangi napozo sa ngazi ati shira meriti michi kichi sing naponda wala chi kar chena control malata ta chaksem la so bata so malala le shu pengre te malana nga so sem jinja yung gore sem jinja yung na de ki yung ata ta nga so jima gwanda wa tsame ha ko gore.
Yes, so this kind of way of examining or analyzing the self, so it is based on one verse of Arya Nagarjuna, the Pandita, that wrote the book, the garland of, I'm sorry, maybe later I'll say it, I don't know how to translate it now. And basically, yes, so this is the method. We are looking among the 6 kind of elements, and eventually there is nothing that we can find and say like, this is the self, this is the solid self, this is the I. And therefore, so how it helps us? So in the daily life, so people can say us a lot of like bad things that can make us angry and so forth, but if we look and examine, then we'll find that there is no self that we can point on. So there is also no self that is the basis of like being hurt or like kind of receiving this kind of bad words or like the one who is being irritated. If there is no such grasping, it's such solid self that is the basis that we hold so strongly, that it is the basis which upon like people like say bad things, people like make angry and so forth. So eventually it will really help us to have like much calm mind, much relaxed mind, and we won't be disturbed so much by things that happen in our life as usual, and we won't get so angry and so forth.
Lazo teni danangani sholoka tombo te tenjori sholoka ni pat tondata yang ngomole job ko son tsawa shira nala pomo li jamete le pomete te mete sha ponda mete sha pa kanji zini sholoka chiore te ke chogimbe
Lasso. Okay, so we talked about the first verse and the way of examining of the first method. So the second method of examining, it is based on the same, like the same author, like Arya Nagarjuna. So he wrote another verse which says the following: He is not the aggregates, not other than the aggregates. No aggregates are there in him, and in the aggregates he is not found. The Tathagata is not the owner of the aggregates. What then is the Tathagata? The Tathagata we need to understand as the Buddha.
La so tan ting taki to tonda chipare te savlo ta mandrawa chire ta yang nga zia te kanri do chire zinim ta nga goni mandrawa nga goni nga tse ton chire to tanga kunem.
Yes, so basically as the previous verse, the meaning of the verse is the same, but like different kind of way of thinking, but the meaning is the same. So what we're going to do based on this verse, we're going to search or examine the self by what we call the 5 extremes.
So tatinal data pombo ni chaperchini shegore tanga so hakore pombo zitinga zongoni kambo bata so zo ponda hakore pombo tanga tenika kanrindu pombo tanga tini chigre tan taterindu tateyina ngo tata parindu ngo chigrindu chepat chigchegore talun tani tsegore chigtatani.
Yes, okay. So as we said, we are going to examine it by means of the 5 extremes. So we are going to examine what we call the self, and we are going to examine what we call the aggregates. The aggregates, so the most simple way that we can understand it, like for now, is that we are talking about the physical aggregate, physical body. So the first 2 extremes that we are going to examine through them will be whether the aggregates, and the self are different in nature or they are same in nature. These are the 2 extremes, the first 2 extremes.
Dagzaya the Pombolingo, Tata in Shigumaris, Pombolingo, Tata Pena, Pombo to Ajani, Dal Chalol and Droja, Pena Motata Ajani, Motanali, Matuana, and Droja, Pombo to Data Pomboningo, Tataina, Koni, Joashita Menjo Jingori. Joashita me sonza Pombo to Ajani, Soso Jambal and Drojana, Pombo Chola Mandroa, the Korea Chikyo Meva, Tenigio Palangazo, Ten Savani Shigmari, Meziat Pombo Catrati, Mishizia, Terimato, Savani capture Mishisonza, Pombolingo, Tataping Aziachin, Menduze Wore.
Yeah, so we are going to examine first through the extreme of the self being different in nature from the aggregate. So if this is the situation that the self is being different in nature than the aggregates, so we explain it first that we can understand it as the. I'll just ask him so. The pumpo the candas kogora.
Pombo Tangatsu Naruto Hakojo at the Shata Chata La Sopa Chupjanguni, Kamba Perkazu Posiora, the God. So what is it?
Okay, so we're going to understand it in the sense of like our physical body, just flesh, blood, bones, like what we have in the physical body. Yeah, like what we see. Yeah, so we are going like to examine like whether the self is like same in nature, like as the aggregates, different than the aggregates, so forth. So this is what we are saying like by saying the aggregates. So okay, so what is going to happen if the so this is the first extreme, right? Like whether the self is being different in nature than the aggregates. So if the self is being different in nature than the aggregates, so such a situation as a following will occur. For example, like it's going to be like a car, which its driver is just like when it's going away, so there is still car and there is still driver, like they can be separate. So this is what is going to happen if the self can be different than the aggregates. There can be like the physical body, it can just stand there and there is like going to be a self that is another, like that we can refer like to these two as like different thing. And like the physical body, it will just keep be living like without the self like being the same in nature as it. So since there is nothing that we can really refer to as like such an existence, there is no such an existence that we can give rise to in our mind that the self is like different from the physical aggregate, so therefore it's reasonable.
La soteni tati jole nemajiano na so pombo ndi shatra ko pombo de ngare nduzena ngaso navigel te ngai samgu yo maris ngaro so saulo tanda jangi manga so chijimba ngaso lakbandra kambandra ninja loandra chimbandra kimandra chashi zubo chashi kandri chigina dada jebo loko yembe lamna ngaso jebo ye loko yensa ndi ngata loso jata so de jebo loya ngai chala tawachi mato ngai imbat ngaso sevne sharya yo mari le tenga ye mashi pandro chade oris.
Yes, and also yes, so this was the first extreme, whether the self is being different the nature than the aggregate. So now we are going to examine it through the following extreme, which is whether the self is the same as the aggregates. So in general, like we don't say that the self is that the self is the same as the aggregates or like the physical body, because also like in normal language we are going to say that this is my hand, this is my kidneys, this is my head, this is my fingers, but we don't say like the finger is me, or like I am the kidneys, I am my head, I am the head, and so forth. And also, if you're going to give the example that we give in the previous class, for example, that if you're going to the hospital and then we are being asked that we need to, for example, to change the organs of our body in order to survive. So of course that will say yes. So it means that if we can exchange like something, if we can like give up on something, so there is still I, which is not the physical thing. So therefore, if there is something if something is exchangeable, we cannot pose it as the I. Therefore, like I cannot be identical to the aggregate, to the physical aggregate.
So that pombo tenga jamandu ta pombo li losa chinga chi yo sari pombo li losi nga yo na tanda pombo li ngo tata pinga ni yo shimaso ta pombo ngo chipa chi yo na ta pombo te ta da ni te pa ten de ni chi rezina te an yin samaris ten de ni chi mai ba te kar rezina pa ten de go na ko so to ashi ransik tamni de mato ni chi le ten de a chi yo re ten de a yo na ransik ma te pa chi re ore ransik ma te pa chi na nga so nga ze ya te le pombo lo ko dichin ke tanga jebo longin rawo ta patsin ro go kamba hi go la pa hi go sam ye tsito nga ze ya chi pa che yo samaris ro ten banita ten ba yo na tsumato parece.
Okay, so yes, so also yes, so okay, now they were like the two extremes. Now the following sorry. So now the next extreme is going to be whether the self is being dependent on the, where is the self that
Temba.
the dagte pombo la temba.
Dagta pombo la tenda pombo the dal tendi on the tanda tashi koro tsukuchi tsuni pati na chena tani ko ransing matom kechiri la ora ransing matom na tani ngato pombo la tendi ni pombo losa gichi ko ni patsan de tendi ni tsi sona meni pachi rishas tang pombo la tendi kech ko tendi kechi na so zo ransing to pachi me pata sa bo sa cha cha sa res ngazeni.
Okay, so the third extreme is whether there is like I, but I like in the sense that there is like self-sufficient I, like that is kind of independent I, that is being dependent on the aggregates, or like aggregates that is being dependent on the aggregates, or like aggregates that are being dependent on such a self-sufficient or like independent I. So if there is such a case where there is independent I that is being dependent on the aggregate, so this is kind of a contradiction, because if there is I which is being dependent on the aggregates, we cannot find any such of a self which is independent self if it is dependent on the aggregates, such as like we imagine or like we have in our head, like this kind of picture of someone who is controlling whatever we're doing. There is someone who is like making like the hand to move, like that is speaking and so forth. But if that kind of I is being dependent on the aggregate, so we cannot posit any kind of self that is independent. So this is by examining through the third extreme, third and fourth actually, like I being dependent on the self, I being dependent on the aggregate, and aggregate being dependent on the self. There is no I that we can find through these two extremes which is independent.
Also, tani dal tanda ten bigupsia maze demba ze de atachiri ta so ta ko atachik pan regime glossa chik ta shraz da menken chiri ta dr pombo ta dal la den yo zin ngi la pa ta ngi kamba na je tinji de yo zin ta tinji go den sa go dr en pa ta to se son na ngi ma reservoir.
Yes, and also the five extreme is whether there is I which possess the aggregates, which possess this physical body. So also there is nothing that we can point on and say like this is the I which possess this physical body.
Lasom dots diona naso ngaze de at karreziti pombo tan remandus ra pombo chashi je tu ta ji mengon ro ni jebola pe ja na je zina recommendus ta teli losse ngachi yo rezina yo tamandus so saulo tan teli losse ngachi yo de tenkiru ngaze zik arat zena teli losse an sia recommendus.
Yeah, so therefore like we just like examine and analyze through these five extremes, and we find out that there is no I that we can say that is different from the aggregates. Also, there is no I which is identical to the aggregates, because eventually, like the aggregate, like the physical body, if we'll have to exchange it in order, like for example, to survive or whatever, so eventually we are going to exchange it. So therefore, we cannot say that this is the I. So there is no I which is the aggregate. There is no I which is different than the aggregate.
Zion di zina manye pala saulo tana kar pengarezina danza chorin ro penton karezina met pena chalang de pe jana nga chalang de sawa chimbo china gindinga ser lolo chi yo sami chala chi ki ro ser lolo chi sami sawa chimbo chi uti nyama shi zi son di ta ser mani chang ro chi cha de pa ha ko son de ni zon te tel sawa chimbo in biblot don ro res te na nga cho yo nga zini sawa chimbo shu chi yo sami na gin shocking amoni de gchete give de word this on the tia choni nyego mari pombo zamzamato tili losan nyego mari pombo ngare de mari tendi che on di teni tanzen ranchin zeng lot ma shik choni shu gedang savlo tantom na shik choni dogre zeni ta namba sa che shok ke che chi yenze vorete
and it dagta celto and it pombo
tachi no dagta chopa che son di pombo se ni pombo li losse da rakamando ta pombo de da rezina tian remando do parti son zena da rakamando pe jana sen ro chi sam ni na ki cha chimbo chen de chi zeon de ser mani cha lo lo re na cha ravjeng ko sem de ser zambi cha chimbo samlo chori pan ro ra de na je da ya tato tsani mahnie wale on di dalan zambi go ranchin zan shik chori ro reze or shik chori ro na chada shik chori ro ni lolo chakare sem kam depo chakare ze or.
Okay, so what is the benefit of this kind of analyzation or examination of the self? So we can give the example of a gold that we have, and eventually we find out that it's like just a metal. This is not actually a gold. The same thing is with the self, because like the self that we cherish so much, so if we try to look through these kind of 5 different extremes, and eventually there won't be kind of independent or like kind of very, very solid self that eventually we'll be able to point on and say, this is the self or this is I. So just like when we find that the gold is not a gold and it's actually just a metal, just like a piece of iron. So the same thing like will happen like with the grasping of self, because we'll find out that there is no such a self that we cherish so much or that we work for so much and so forth. If there is no such a self, so based on that, as we said, all the anger, the attachment, all the disturbing emotions and the problems that come out of them, so eventually, naturally, they're going also to decrease, because the attitude of the self-cherishing attitude and the self-grasping mind, since we didn't find any kind of self, so it's going also to decrease.
Also tani ngaso manzda jiwa tani de jani tangaso nabyin ni joki ngamo ni gonda partanga zini tsawa chimbo chi so so sawlo na tang de ore ngaso ni kama samje chi kana so so nga ta kawandu chi tsia yinda ro nga zia ta so tani ti ji ngaso trawa challenge chi na so nga zia ta so la kan de zin cha ndu chi nabji karin cha go sare teri in nauje chi ni pombo go sem ni nga so chi zini nga zia ta chinji chi rendu chi tsia yinda so Geshe Rangrig Dorje so sawlo ta ni kama ni sum chi tsi da ro.
It's okay, so this was basically the general topic of the lesson, and now what we're going to do is that we're going for 2-3 minutes, we're going to try to find this kind of self by means of like try to see how this kind of self is in our mind, how this kind of self is appearing in our mind. So this is what we're going to do for 2-3 minutes. So we're going to try to find like what this kind of self, how it appears in our mind. What is that I, like how, like let's try to search for it, let's try to look for it. What is that kind of self? How does it appear?
Also tani de chikri ro tani ta trawa chale chi ta choso nga ta kawandu choso samna nga ta karin sari sa.
Okay, so this was the kind of analyzation that we try to do. So now tell me, you like, where is that I, like, that we try to find right now? Like, how does it appear to you? Where is that I?
You know.
Also.
There is no I, because I can understand that we are made up of parts, different parts. Yes, I can understand we are made of different parts, different organs in the body. Yes. So this I understand, and the parts and the whole is not I.
The whole?
Whole as the whole body, made up of different parts, hands, legs, mouth, eyes, all these parts make up the self, but it's still not the self. Yes.
And it chashet and it chashigi sogete?
Sobat dama chashi tamari ta sobat rilare. Sobat da ina Sroni la shita yo penje zedro. Tsokpa de da zed tanda pati da wagti. Tsokpa da yizena ka de ore. Tsokpa zed da yizena yo. Shashi mombo chindia tomato. So ni kaptan kabarz che yo marwas. So ni pa. Tat chashi nga so chashi tsama pena te shintal pegare. Shintal rakoson. Shintal pega shitat tsama driwi kaptan sa driwi kable ni la chupa shikan rendoas. Chashi de yo pata. Chashi yo na te ni kal shita yo reves. Sonza tsokpa de tsona pa tsona chashi mombo drigi chumuga me sonza nga zenin zu sa tsokpa chi yo mare ze war. Do dina pa tsona tsokpa zeni on zu sa chimundoas chashi yandu pa chimato yo mare te la war.
Yeah, so basically it's also what Chandrakirti said in the Entering to the Middle Way, which is said that also he kind of negated the idea that there is like a kind of a collection that we can say that this is the self. Like you just now gave the example of like the collection of all the organs and all the parts in your body, right? So also in the same manner, so Chandrakirti also, he negated it, that there is like kind of a collection that eventually we can call as the self. Because eventually if there is a collection that we can call as the self, so eventually we'll have to also on this kind of a collection, we'll have to put the finger on and to ask like, where is that self exactly? Because basically it's also just being composed out of different parts. Since it's composed out of different parts, we cannot eventually say that this is the self and to point on something and to find something.
Ngalin zu inde chiti ngalin zu arezina reze gorete yen shajaro yena pan zu sa tingi pe kolin zu yore matong ngalin zu sa tili lokse ngazi achi tiar komar pe ko te ngai rete shiomar.
Yes, and also like in general, basically if you point on me, so you can say that you point on me. There is no like you cannot say like that you don't point on me. But when you point on me, basically you just point at my forehead, like you don't really point on me. So this is like what we mean, like that there is no I that is different, like that, not different, sorry, that is not the aggregates, but there is also not I which it is the aggregate. Because you don't really point on me, you just point on the forehead. But you can still say like I point on you, like you cannot say like I don't point on you, of course.
The chashi tsini pache on the nambi jongo naljan and the lakigum zeri, nabi yonjaka gum the mari, and the soso denicali, soso saulo tsini, soso kepachini, nataka and Duzani Zizana, Narzan the dance and the shichon in Rogo Reserve, Jogum the marita, that's it on them.
Yes, and also in general, so we can say that there are two different kinds of meditation. One is stabilizing meditation, and one it is analytical meditation. So this kind of meditation we call like is under the category of analytical meditation. So what we can do is that we can really try to think and reflect about like where is the self like among like these different parts. And since like eventually we won't be able to find such a solid self that we can point our finger on and say like this is the self, so it will really help us in order to decrease the self-cherishing mind, the self-cherishing attitude, the self-grasping ignorance. This is the benefit of this kind of method.
I can understand all that, but sometimes I still have the self-cherishing because I can control my anger or my emotion sometimes, but sometimes I still get angry.
Control set chesa the Yamashi that's on the chetomat, so Congo or it and the Yomo the chori tomato pedi Tisonyo chicken all to it and Chitamari. Yenaya, the Dautsia Tenichina, dance the Shichori Rona Bajoni, so no patchy on the control the Shichimbo Malata, Tenji Pingri, Tenji, Komshikazi in a Kali, as the same Ziat and Yawashik shoot and do.
Yes, okay, so.
Not any.
Yes, so basically, yes, like this is something that we really need to get habituated to. Like this is not something that, like, that is totally like going to be eliminated. This is something that we just, as a habit, like we just need to get the habit of like not getting angry and so forth. So this kind of method of searching for the oneself and eventually not finding it, like this kind of this analyzation. So it really helps in decreasing the self-grasping and self-cherishing attitude. And so when, for example, one person like is going like to harm us and so forth. So naturally, if we're going to practice this kind of method, so we won't get so angry, and we're going to habituate ourselves with this kind of way of thinking.
Ini Dorje.
Kale. Kale mama lai.
Nasa.
Okay.
Karches. Dorje.
Okay, so there is one question from the online. I can feel a strong belief that I exist. If I try to question it, what I find is that my thoughts and mental images are close as I can to get to.
Coit. Drumundua.
As far as I get to, my thoughts are like okay, sorry. Yes. If I try to question it, what I find is that my thoughts and mental images are as close as I can to get to it. My thoughts are like hearing my voice, and the mental images of myself are like seeing my face. I feel so belief my eyes. Te dag yopate, te nape shukchen pod zingio. Te ngate celkardotu. Ani te dag serete, ani te tam dave tag nieshute. Karelesana te nie kan sa te nie loyal tu charwateco, ta nie samlotan wateco. Te dag tam pe chikpa da poshalgiore. Tende sonsa.
Ale leba de yin sangu du zerita.
Lepa marete nie samloteco.
Samlo dai.
So rete.
Oh, hapas.
Te pe
Ta nashi dai zet mombo legora. Tanga tsu kiwa ngamani chimanjo denye te kari yin zewoti nashi yin zewora najuna. Ta nashi dai da kelena ta rakki pache or namji konsem chokwa nashi zet pechik nashi cha mombo yoris. Tele ngo mandrawi cha mombo yoris. Ta nashi tina control tereta zopa tereta docha tereta yana tsewa tereta nije tereta nashi zet do ching zu sayo marion na lo chokpa soni do yoris. Tedi tedi nani chashi patsi sona ya nashi de da reze sa nashi lan zu samundoas tedi chik tsigior. Tetsi sona te amundu la or.
Okay, yes. So basically, it is quite similar to the attitude of like trying to identify the self with the consciousness, right? Like to see like whether the I is the consciousness or not. Like just what you asked, like whether the I is like my thoughts, like my mental images, and so forth. So this is another question. So just like His Holiness is saying, so if we try to examine the consciousness as the I, so eventually we'll have to kind of to point on and say like which kind of different moments, so like there is like kind of the mental, so like which kind of the moments like we can put our finger and say that this is I, in the sense that is this like this moment or this moment or this moment of the mental consciousness, is this the I? Like which kind of moment we can say that it is exactly the I, which is the love that is part of like the mental consciousness, which is the anger, which is part of the mental consciousness, like which exactly thing we can say that in this mental consciousness, which is also being just like the other thing being composed by different parts, which kind of part we can say eventually that this is the I. So this is the way to analyze it. Then eventually there's nothing that we can actually find and say like in the mental consciousness that this is I, this is the self that I try to find, and I found it eventually.
Reteningar tsunabji na nishipa samsazum ngashipa samat tets kalika pondichori taina soso chita ka tanya bondu ngazia ka insa. Tanachu shena tisona nyeg mare zeurendo tsidina ina soso chini ngoni nyamyong ngoni nyegundu mendo chita tarwa.
Yes, and also in general, like we say that there is my consciousness, there is my mind, but we don't say like I am the mind, like I am mind. Like we don't say it, like also like in general. So if you talk from the Buddhist perspective, like there's nothing that we can actually eventually try to look for and then like find and say like this is the I. But we need also like to try to do it like from our own experience, like to try to find this kind of I. So this is what we can do, like really try to look, try to search, try to think about it, like where is this I, like what is the most closest thing that we can posit and say like this is the I.
You said that you can't find it? but you also have to try anyway.
But you also, sorry?
But you said you can't find it according to Buddhist perspective. Like it's impossible to find it. But you have to try anyway. That's what you were saying.
Like from the Buddhist perspective, I'll just repeat once again like what Genna said. From the Buddhist perspective, there is no I that if you look for it, you can find. But we should also like do it from our own experience. Like from our own experience, like not this is like from the Buddhist perspective, but from the experience, like we should also try like to search and to see like whether eventually it's true or not, like whether like we can find like certain I or not. Det kommer ju mellan det kan kan som på det younger det som någon andra person.
Ta sina rasari. Tani sina marana ngati yore bezina yota yore ta yoata pombo tsokpa te tsamgni pala teni chumjo teni de chima topsi sona yo maris. Sonza chi ngalo no pache songal chi che sonza ta pombo la teni de chima toje sina rakayo maris e war.
Yeah, so we should try to look and find ourselves like whether there is kind of an I that we can pause it or think on. So eventually, if you are going to try to find, there is no I that we can find except of that there is like I that is being merely imputed, merely labeled upon the different kind of aggregates. That we can say like this is I, this is you.
Can you also jamba karchwandu ngoni tanji chipsina Japan tosare?
So do you have any other question? And also like if you try to find, do you think that it will be beneficial for you or not? This kind of I.
I thought that the I is the actions I do in the world.
Kongi sampala ni te dag serete ni te nie chawa chapatezo te mitse nang te chawa chapatezo te ngaresa.
Chawata.
Re.
Chawata ni lekan chumari. Ni lekari ngari.
Okay, so the question is whether the things that you're doing, like the actions that you're doing, is this you or this is the actions of you? Like, am I the action or this is kind of my action? I am the action or this is my action?
I don't have an answer.
Te kona te lensel pa yung resa.
Matso nabji ngi chegi yeze ondi chawata ngi chejo ag leka chindu chumata nga yesamba te parchenga sol shaga yomar. Ngi leka chenjo yeze tingi chawata ngi chegi yeze ora. Chawara wa terwa. No sonza te parchenga nga yesamba te lola yongu yo chumaro sangutu. Ni chawan richi lagro. Ta patsi sona zikpo pombo chashi la teni takpa tsamdrichi ma to tsiara koma te le chiondi nga te tsi de na danza de shik chonri rogo re zore te ma ze jima chi zikpo to so nasa rogo chondi nasa u katigli yang teni tsini ni nasa de kawandu sani pa zavlo tani shu tsina yang nasa de pa yin ro anda o teni tsori ngoni ngoni ta nasa yigmara o teni yon andu teni nga ro le nyamyo te tse le nyon.
Okay, so yeah, also like in general, like in the normal language, so we don't say like the action is me, like I am the action. Like we say like my action or like the thing that I did, but we don't say like I am, for example, this action is me. It's like it's also like a bit kind of difficult like to give rise to such an idea like in the mind, like I am the action or like the action is my action. So yeah, basically if you try to find, so what we say, there is no I that we can find eventually except of the I that is merely imputed among the five aggregates, among the aggregates that we talked about like this lesson. There is no I that we can find except of the I that is merely imputed on the aggregates. So yeah, it's very beneficial to do this kind of method of searching and analyzing, as we said, to diminish or to decrease the self-cherishing attitude, the self-cosmic ignorance that cause for so many problems in our life. This kind of method really help to decrease this kind of sense. And also we can give like more kind of specific example. For example, if you get sick and then we are trying to just a sec.
Pena tate che te jardin pena semba ro ma kyo atindi jongra semba ro ma kyo atindi jondi lolo deni ndi cheni ani ngi semba ma kyo ta kawandu teni pa tsini shata papa de ripata to washinol semba ma kyo ga nenga ro ta ka yongu ti na shindu esa nga so yona ra sha ndo semba ma ki ti to washi o te na pa saulo tani tsini sonda parshi tsini sondi landre sondi semba ma kyo ta ma jeni lolo chandro atindi ndu.
Yes, and also like he gave the example of being sick, but we can also take the example of like just being unhappy, like being kind of unhappy mind or worried mind. So in this situation, what we can do is quite the same. Like we say like that I'm unhappy, like I have unhappy mind. But then we should try to look for it, like where is this unhappy mind, like exactly, like whether we can look for it and eventually we'll be able to point on and say like, oh, this is like the unhappy mind. Like, and since like just the other thing, like there's nothing that we can eventually will be able to point on and say like, this is the unhappy mind. So it really helps our mind to get much more relaxed and to be, yeah, like this kind of mental problem to the quiz.
Tendi tsi na keda na chu na ni ta tai chi na zina dang zi shik chong rin zhuo ni nyo mo shik chong a ta ta zo tsi ge yo re ta tendi na nga le chi shi tra nyam yo shik chi mo me ma to chi sem ba ma ki bi ka lu tendi che na ko ya ta ta nyam yo ti zi yo
Te sempre mo che potete cavolo io metto giù musu manina.
zi ga zi zo ma na ko ran jing lo lon de chang du ta dang zi chong rin zhuo zi ti nga han ba ja che me te dang zi chong rin zhuo nga le nyam yo chi bu che me
Okay, so yeah, so this is the method, like trying to find for the self and then eventually not being able to find it. So the self-cherishing attitude, the self-grasping mind, is going to the quiz. So since I don't have a lot of experience in it, so I don't have a lot of experience in this such a thing, like such a method, like to say like that I the quiz, like my self-cherishing attitude and my self-grasping mind and so forth. And also like we can do the same with the unhappy mind, like to really try to look for like, where is this unhappy mind now? Like, where is that feeling? Whether I can look for it and eventually find this kind of thing that I can point my finger on and say like, this is my unhappy mind. Since we cannot find such a thing, so it will really help also like to decrease this kind of feeling and make our mind much more relaxed. Yes, so we have another question from online. Okay, so I is more like a collective concept. It's impossible to find an independent I. Am I getting it correctly? And the dark side and the kind of the Samsul Dapore Mato. The Tik to Gida, not near Yomare, the Tenderbe. Yes, exactly like this.
National share the Taran re young Alignam which you thought she were national share the Taran. But not to Congol in Chavats Amato, Pombo Latini Chats Amato. This one I recommend as a theory. This one Amara did to Gomja and the Gomchin in this Aula Giritana, down the Shichon and Drogo is what they say.
Yes, exactly. So from the Buddhist perspective, this is exactly the idea. I don't have a lot of experience in it, but apart from it, this is like the idea from the Buddhist perspective. So, yeah, we can say that the I, yes, it is something which is merely imputed by our conceptual mind on the aggregates. But, yeah, apart from that, there is no I that we can find and say, like, this is I, like, in the aggregates and so forth, like what we just explained. So, yes, and also, like as we said before, it really helps to decrease the self-cherishing attitude and the self-grasping mind.
Because a Jendanga chick, Titsore, you and this Aula return, Chichena, money. Same kind of pendo yo kere same kind of ngaso choose at the same kind of pendo ko chetere ma to tani chalo ko pamjo check ro tani le chu che kan ro yo ma choose at so same le je te chen re tani sam sam le kom di tan da ke gom che ni lo chini sa lo tani nga ze at ka andu tang ni che te chi raman ra ge du mom bo tu pa mom bo chi sa de na chondo mun do tani sa lo tan da chi che na ma se no le de ke pendo yo jere.
Yes, so yeah, so on a daily basis, like if we have time, so we can try to kind of use this kind of line of reasoning or this kind of analytical meditation to try to find this kind of self, like where is that I, where is the self. So we can also see like whether it helps the, whether it helps the mental mind, whether it helps our mind, whether it makes us more happy. Because basically this is the purpose of the Buddhist philosophy. This is the purpose of Buddhism, just to make us more happy, make us more relaxed. This is not something that is going to help us, in terms of like outer conditions, in terms of like getting like more money or like having more a good financial condition and so forth. So this I that we like work all day long for it and like that we cherish it so much and that we do so many bad things for him and so forth. So we need to see like whether it's worth it, like that all the negative actions that we are doing, like for this kind of purpose of the I. whether it's worth it if, after all, I cannot find this kind of I when I try to look for it.
Also, jump trying to.
Okay, so is there any other question?
Yes. The Buddhism believes in Gilgul Neshamot, that the soul doesn't die, that it continues to continue to another life. So my question is, if the I is part of the soul, and if yes, how does it? Is there any part of it after I die? Will the I be a part of my soul in the next life or not?
If, like, for example, if you die, so is there still I that is remaining?
Is the I and the soul, or like, is there any connection between it?
Like, in the sense that, like, if eventually, like, for example, like, you're moving from life to life, and
Yes.
whether, like, there is that I which stays, like, kind of.
Is I and the soul are separate things, or the same, or connected? Like,
Okay.
how does it work?
I think the question is I, the body and the consciousness, right? You're
What
talking about
again?
consciousness because we have this physical body, but when we die, your question is whether our consciousness, our thinking, our thoughts still where it goes. Is that your
Yeah,
question?
if it's connected to the soul somehow.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the consciousness.
Also, anit nacho ginanola, anit ning samjola, kelen yorba.
Ah.
Ning samjola. Te tsechima, tsengoma. Te kiwang apji. Kelen yorba. Anit te kelensa, anit perna te daxerete. Anit te namshi, te mitse chigne chikto, anit te drog yorba. Anit te jona, anit te namshi te tang. Nga serete, jelwa karere, perna ngate namshire, namshita ngate kakare, yamenete nga namshite jelwa te shembere te kandidapare.
Rejenta, Taji Nazia, the Namshi Tampo, Topa Latini, Tapa, some Tindimato, Lolshanga, Ziachi Yori, Tinja Mato Paki Pazis on the Jayo Maris, Jawata Yora, Data Navshini can Jawat, Tentin Binjazia, Nambijongo, Tentin Baziachindoa, Tenje, Javatri, Javatri, Tatil. Namshita to so Topa Latini Nazini, Ming Pataja, Lolangazia, Chishayo, Tesam Gujagore Mato, Tilitis on the Yomaris. Даже дачузея то телетеничонко. Навшила та тени nga tarpares, pombola teni nga tarpares, ni lakpala teni nga tarpares, ni navshila teni nga tarpares. Njeva te samre. Tela teni taksa te yin son sam njeva tere. Pena nga mi chigle Rangrig Dorje zemi tarparo, teni nga Rangrig Dorje chanson teni navshila teni nga zea chi tarpa sam. Pa topi pa tarsamato yo mares ni otne Geshe ore.
Okay, so as for your question, so yeah, like this kind of consciousness that you said, like that going from life to life and so forth. So what is the connection between this and the self, right? That we are trying to examining. So the self just is like the other aggregates that we have. For example, we have like the physical aggregate, right? So just as the self is merely imputed upon the physical aggregate, so the self is also merely imputed upon the consciousness. Except from that, there is no I, for example, that it is the consciousness, that we can say like that the I is the consciousness. Or like that the consciousness and the I are like a separate thing, like as you suggested. So the I is merely imputed on the consciousness.
Tarzini na kingatsu, Michi Gungotan Tonson, Contonson Lagroa, Gondian Shotamanton. Tetsam Tonson Labia Lagore, Tetsam Jagore, Teli Conton, Pati Son and Tonton Jayo Maris.
The Pernate Kongidon.
Don the Ton, Tetsam Guntoria, Don the Corre de Omarta, Don the Ton Tetsam Conton Jacori, Nazia Tetri Pataja, and Yunzina Raco Maris, what is she were?
Yes, and also like we can take, for example, a situation like this. So, for example, we are seeing a person. And then when we are seeing a person, we are seeing his face, and then we say, oh, like this is the person. For example, this is Tashi. So we say that this is Tashi. But when we try like to look exactly like in the face of the person, there is no Tashi that we can actually like put the finger on. We can say instead of Tashi also John, like what kind of name that is convenient for you like to refer to. But we cannot say like, for example, the face that I point upon and say like this is John. There is no John eventually like in this face that I can look for and eventually find this John. This is the same with the consciousness, like that we can point on the consciousness and say like, for example, yeah, like this is like just that kind of an example, but there is no thing in the consciousness that we can eventually will be able to point on and say like this is I. and so forth.
That's
I have a question about. So why do we all look different and we all think differently and have different issues with our bodies and different thoughts? Why are we
So why?
different? Why are we different if there is no I?
Kelsi dagmena te karchen ngaso tsangma kakare. Ten samloton tan kakare te sorwa kakare dapo te kelsi dagmena karchen ngaso tsangma kakare.
Ale manda chaso re terwa re da me pa ya tinga so tsina me pare ma to ta ba tsam ge yore ze ta chi lemje te ji ki da yore ni laimba pa ta wa tsam te garan le jar gore ma to pa tsi son na me re tsi son na me pa ta nga so ge dang sa lo ta nga so sim lin ge wa chi tang re zi ne su te she de yor ta nga so ka in ge ta da ji pombo manda wa yora da ji pombo manda wa la te ni da pinga manda le on so sa Sora ta na shi to ka le ngor ra so daksa dakje dakchu ze ya te le ngor daksa ta manda wa chi le ni ta nga wa nyam bi cha wora ni dong bal ni nga wa nyam ba cha kyu dong bal te ni kyo nyam ba cha seven char ton manda wi cha ni so manda wa cha ndo ngor
Sen chadan da sharna.
to bi ta sa wi so se so manda wa char so ta ra manda wa ja gore ma to te ni pa si so ne ra manda ke cha yo mari
Te tokpa takpa tsamenza, ani tokpa te soso tokpa kakainza, ani te
nga so to pa manda wa sharon gora manda wa sha ta ra manda wa ja gore ngo se so te she ka pondo
Dis, te perna te
Mandrava yuata kar reziti daja mandrava yor. Nga so pombo mandrava kyangra. Pombo mandrava la teni da mandrava yu par. Te topa pa ta ni mandrava ta yung ko ro te shi si. Mandrava yu.
te
Ke
dachi
ta
minda.
nga yo ze gorta. Nga yo ala to ki nga te mezi ni te yinchu ma chi ha ko go. Nga yo ta de kar ze pombo la teni nga o nyam ba chawa te za nga ja goris. Teni pa si sona mandu la or.
Okay, it's a bit difficult to translate it, I'll try. But basically it doesn't mean there is self, like there is self, but there is no independent self. Like the self that we should posit is the self that is merely imputed or merely labeled upon the aggregates, such as we explained, right? Like the consciousness, the physical aggregate, and so forth. So based on like this kind of basis of labeling, we can call it like the basis of designating imputation. So on this basis, we can say like this is him or like this is you and so forth, like based on this basis. But there is nothing that we can, among this basis, we can actually like put the finger on and say like this is you or like and so forth. So this is with regards like to the I. So since the basis of labeling is different, so also like I is also different. It doesn't mean that there is no I, it just means that there is no I which is independently existent, and we can, actually when we try to find it, we can actually find something. Did it make any difference?
Yeah, yes, but I understand that there is an I, that we need like to look at how we see this I. But if you say there is no like meaning to the physical, so then I ask, so why do we look different?
There is no meaning to the physical. What do you
To
mean?
the physical, like the way I look, what I put on myself. Like you say, there is no meaning to that because there is.
I understand her questions. What she say is that if the self doesn't exist, then why are we all look different? Is that what you mean? And why are every one of us different? Is that your questions?
Yes.
Why
Is there a
for
meaning to the way we each of us look and choose to dress, choose to talk,
okay.
our actions?
Okay. If there is no I, so for example, why I make different decisions, why I think like that.
Why everybody looks different physically and mentally? Yeah.
This chikpata pore. Na chichana kosong ina te kesi dag mena ni karechene pena ni sanlo tontan te kongi sanlo tontan tan kongi sanlo tontan te
Mandra chare.
minda chagiore karechene te kesi dag mena.
Da mena kuso mandra chate kar reziti pombo mandra wandwa.
La sona chikte tonton yorna tigre. Okay, so the Dagmin Java in the
pombo mandrava was.
okay, so like the aggregates are different.
Sonza, pombo mandrava latini nga the tandazini nga son charsa mandrava yori, la namshi mandrava yori.
Yeah, so based on the fact that the aggregates are different, so we can say like that you are different, you are different, you are different. Your physical aggregate is different, so therefore like we can say like
That's on I've the panton on the mandrava ching tongorim, Tonga Taran, Tini mandrava jagore mato, Tini patsis on a rakayomar.
persona carriera.
Partisona, dan recommendo Tangatson Tonsel, mandrava tongondo. What did some round of jagore, is them jigging on the jazz at Terry.
Okay,
That's
so
what Karan Tongoyona Taran jagorim, Gutsis on a rakamaris.
yeah, so whatever we see, this is what we need to posit. Like for example, if we see like that the aggregates of you and you like is different, so this is just like that. But what we mean in like there is no self, we mean that if we try to look among these aggregates, there is no self that eventually we can find and point on and say like, this is I or this is self. This is what it means. Except from that, like of course, like we'll have like to put, we'll have to posit like the difference among like the aggregates, like how like we appear like in different manner. But apart from that, like there's no I that we can eventually find and say.
Can I add something? Gemma, I think it has to touch with the physical body difference and mentally different. It has to do with our karmic connections from our past life. That's the karma that makes us what we have done in the past life that makes us different in different shape and different thought, different thinking. It has to go to talking about karma in a previous life.
Okay.
Should I say?
Yes. Should I say what?
You explain to.
Yes, yes. Ito kontis nyo pagyapsansa. Nyo pagyapensa. Ito pernan ngatso supo tan sanlo tonta sorwa la sopa ito mindawa in pagyapsan te kararesana ito lete tan jalware. Pernan ngatso psengoma ngatso le tetante sakta ito te dela te debu tetante mingiore. Te tan jalware.
Re. Tarar.
Yes.
Tanda Kirtanga so Tanda them Saulo to them Mamma Kandi Chori Sound that the Tangazo Tato Zivalatini Saulo and Korungor. Now shall get the Nazo Mamma Yim Baris and Jade Yora. Hurry. Mamma you Baris and Nazo Saulo de Yoro. But the Taran Jan and Ricori, Taram and Jayo, and that's when the Tato Zia, the Carol Pen is a dancer changing royal to Tamio Pengares in its Yore Mato, the dancer let you Pendora minutes, you go as a Cheomar. The Nazo Music is Mandawa and she shared down the march only tongue, Tanyam Bochi, Pentochi Yores in what you share or Mandramata, so now Genoja, Karasam gone at 10 of Jan and Ricori, take Kabarchimar.
Yeah, so in general, like in the world, so of course, like you can say like he is different, so forth, like he appears different, he thinks different, like this is different, and so forth. But what we try to do in this kind of method is to try to look in the different aggregates, like the different aggregates that the self is being imputed on, and say like whether there is I that eventually I can find, like in these different aggregates. Except from that, of course, like we can say like that the fact that there is no I doesn't mean that we cannot say like that things appear different and so forth, and like things like are being different. But also like the purpose of this kind of method is to really to decrease the self-cherishing attitude, the self-grasping mind, and also if there is no benefit, so we don't have to do it. This is the purpose of this method.
That's what she's a
Do you have any other question?
I have a question.
Tani tereng ketan lob sen den ngazo musik tato tsai kore. Tani nav ji metse ga nal ngazo chama ga ma jamse chanchi chi go ta ke chembo shundu ra jamse zya tul magani sa kan yo mare la jamse zya te nji te kel pen kre so gel metse nal ke kre mi jambal pen to te tsre na chema to na tani no te ki mande ni ta chi tonda yo me kangal ta mi chibo mari so chang ra wotan ji na yo chi tonda me sal ko solen Tupoma to Kosoli, Gazi Chuchu, the social Gazi Chonjon, the Tendina, Kurosole, Sova, the Kurosolia, de Dicchio Sonzanga, to Tonda Mesal, Mazena, Buzina, Sochas, and a Karina, Kangi Machini, Mayero Kyonto, Jamsi and Juzua to get Shachon the kitchen boys as an answer someone but such a year.
Okay, so yeah, and also like yeah, this is what like the topic of the class. If there is no any other question, if you have, so of course.
I have a question.
But so just finish to translate it then, because otherwise I'll forget it. Sorry, because he said also something different. So yeah, the topic of the class was trying to find the self. Yeah, like kind of to examine the self or to analyze the self in order to decrease the self-cherishing mind and self-grasping attitude. And also another very, very important thing is what we call the love and compassion. So love and compassion is very, very important. It really brings a lot of benefit in this life for us and for others. And also we can also think about it in the sense that there are like so many living beings which are not only humans, like very small bugs and so forth. And just like us, they also, all what they want is to be happy and not to suffer. So therefore, like we should do our best in order to benefit them and not to, not like without any kind of reason, like to harm them. We should try to strive the best in order to develop this kind of love and compassion that will eventually will help us to benefit us and others. Okay, so?
If there is no I, how should we think of ourselves and treat ourselves and perceive ourselves?
Kelsi dagmena, anite ngatso sosolani te kandes chegore, te sosokola kandes anotangore, te
다 다음에 빠지니 셰데야 가르즈나 랑친전 제야다 소소 싸와침부 랑리 자치바 사블로 텔레아 기체트리 베나가 좀 맞센저 키포지 키고나 랑리 자치비 사블로 요사들 맞셀 강이시란체 오마 소소 바지크 돈달라 사블로 단데니들 갈레지마토 당가 나로 바지크 체트지레카지 코코롬 바지 치기치글 판스 로파교니 메니다 소소 치온데니 뇨타 마리 강이 치리치린도오레 랑 친전도 마총징니다 잠판을 사울로 당데니 미 잠바그테나테 미 야포르와제테 미 잠세처리 미 야포레제니다 야포시그레라 코소 코로 마세나라 키포총그레 코로군고리 데비 마사말 키포총요소사 다음에 사울로 당데야테 키르탄 나사와니니 메레타 제리오 마르타 랑 리자치 발 사울로 식침보 용위체테 테 사울로 당데고레.
Yes, so in general, this kind of selflessness, right? Like we try to analyze this kind of self and eventually not finding it. So therefore, like conclusion is kind of selflessness, right? But that kind of method, so the purpose of it is in order to decrease the self-cherishing attitude and to make other before self. Like this is the purpose of the method, because like when we put other before self, so many problems in our life dissolve. If we only like strive for the purpose of my welfare, like my well-being and so forth, so we'll have so many problems in our society. And also like if each one will do this kind of this thing, like I'm only working for myself, for my own welfare and so forth, so it's going to make so many problems. Also someone who has this kind of attitude, like I'm going to benefit others, I'm going to put self, like others before self, so naturally a lot of people will like him a lot, like will praise him, like will feel much more comfortable with him and so forth. So this is like the purpose of this kind of the method of like searching for the oneself and so forth. The purpose is to decrease the self-cherishing attitude and to increase the other cherishing attitude.
네 진이 진놈 부지 갑자와치 고아테스 로마요 사삼치리 아주 다제야데 지손나 니가 마레즈니 티케차드와 수도 테레마토 nga tsawani merizini tekecha shegyo marta lenje songo marchinga merize marta nga zeyat kensa jire zisona recommenduse wotet ko norma chijaya.
Okay, so also in another thing, so it is a bit strange, like the kind of mode of existing of the I, because what we say, we don't say like there is no I, like we don't say like there is no I at all or something like that. We just say that if we try to look for it, there is nothing that we can find and point and say this is I. But of course, like there is I, like that we can say like this is you, this is him, I'm eating, I'm sleeping and so forth. It doesn't mean like that there is no I. It just means that if we try to look for it among like the different things, like my physical body consciousness, so forth, we cannot.
Tari shajara, tani nga so shajara tami.
Okay, so if there is no question, if there is question, so but if there is no, so we'll just put it like this.
Twitchy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Tutara.
Question. Hello.
Ya, tani shashanga so. Rawa. Ale college troachi yom. Oh yeah. Paso mari troa mari.
Tio.
Ah.
Natatong gyurme.
Oh ina chik shana.
Okay, so yeah, if you want to go, you can go. Like there's another person that asks a question now. If you want to stay, if you want to go, whatever. So what's continuum? What is continuum? When we die, our body decayed and our continuum carry on. Can't we call continuum? Te semgiu segate te karela kogore ten ngazzo te shitu ani ngazzo te perna supo te niamdo giore te rocha giore ina te ngazzo semgiu te mutune
semzeyat karrize wora
re
tada semzeyat ngazzo nachugu nani shena te zigchan chi shaka yomar zigme nipan chi shaka ta zigme nipa zeyat Tsendi pombo le teni de orda ngazzo tsendi kambo capture jona ya pombo jamba chi le teni namshi tamu ta long tamu nyam de kiwa chimal ma gini joja ka yore ze wori semzeyat zu ponji je khomar zigme chi shaka Ekia chik teze khor kar sa jan rikpa kor yerla ke pa che teni gtenji khan ko teni zikchan na mayin ke teni chigli shiba ja khor
ani te se ching to
no gyun zeyat kiwa chiman ro kia ngama ni ma yungori chiman ro
Yes, so what we call as continuum, we say that this is something which is not physical thing, like continuum in the sense of like mind. Like this is what we understand in continuum, like mind. So mind is non-physical thing, in the sense that it is not something which is like the body and so forth, which is abstractive. This is non-physical thing, which we can also say that this is something which perceives its object, something which engaging with its object. And yeah, it is not physical thing, and also this is something that goes from the previous life to this life and to the next life and so forth.
That's
okay. Okay, so now we're going to finish it.
Thank you,
Okay,
Geshe.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Like this?
Children.